Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining this session this afternoon, and wherever you are from all over the world. Thank you for joining us in this very important discussion in the Aswan Forum. So today's discussion is entitled From Rapid Economic Recovery to Structural Transformation, Africa's Pathway Towards Sustainable Recovery and Development. We will be together for about an hour and 15 minutes. Our speakers will be with us throughout, and we have about 75 minutes worth of discussion, and then we will move from there to a Q&A session. Now, I'm very honored to be accompanied today by some absolutely illustrious speakers. Foremost among them is His Excellency Dr. Mahmoud Mohiuddin, who is the Executive Director representing Egypt at the International Monetary Fund, and he is a Special Envoy on financing the 2030 Agenda at the United Nations, and really he needs no introduction. His Excellency Minister Amr Talat, the Minister of Communications and Information Technology for the government of Egypt, is unfortunately not going to be able to join us this morning, but will present a video message. Her Excellency Dr. Amani Abu Zaid, who is the Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy at the African Union Commission, one of the most well-known figures on the infrastructure front in Africa, is also joining us. We also have Emmanuel Lobonzadio, who is the Head of Public Policy for Sub-Saharan Africa from Twitter. And of course, Dr. Helmi, who is the Head of Corporate and Social Responsibility and the CEO of EFG Hermes Foundation, who will also be speaking in today's session. So to just get us started and to lay the groundwork for our discussion, so the context for which we are having today's discussion is we have a continent of 1.3 billion Africans where GDP has been growing steadily in real terms for the past decade, but GDP per capita has not. So we have an interesting continent where the continent is getting richer, but the general populace of that continent, the 1.3 billion people on the continent, are not. So how is it that we have a continent where countries individually get richer and general wealth in individual countries is not growing in real terms? This speaks to a continent that even before COVID-19 resilience issue. COVID has now come to Africa and it has been economically devastating. Those connected, please, to mute their microphones. Thank you. So COVID has been economically devastating for Africa, and this has come as a result of fiscal distress that was induced by COVID, where commodity markets have pretty much collapsed over the past year. We have seen commodity prices for a whole range of goods literally collapse. Oil among them, cocoa beans, coffee beans, precious metals have all collapsed with the exception of gold. Some are recovering now, but this also highlighted Africa's pre-existing fragilities. And to this end, COVID, at least on last reports, represents about 3.9 million infections across 1.3 billion Africans with about 100,000 deaths. Now, those numbers are likely incorrect numbers. Likely the health impact of COVID is much bigger, but Africa does not have the ability to do statistical tallies as well as countries in both Europe and the Americas. What we do know is that Africa has lost about 5 years worth of growth in approximately 14 months due to the economic pressures that COVID has come to bear on the continent. Tourism has pretty much dried up for the big six oil producers. The price of oil, while rebounding, has also taken a major hit and has caused fiscal crisis across a variety of countries. Workers' remittances have also slowed. And to that effect, many of the countries, of the 54 countries on the African continent, have found themselves in a situation of fiscal distress due to exogenous shocks caused by COVID-19. The African Development Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank have all come in to try and help in any way they can. The African Development Bank, through its crisis relief facility, has made available just under $5 billion in fiscal support to roughly 39 African nations, so they can deal with the decline in foreign exchange revenues, and as a result, their inability to finance their external debt and to fund various government investment projects in their countries. The IMF, the World Bank have also provided facilities to the tune of just under $100 billion. But if this were to be perceived as stimulus for 1.3 billion people, about $100 billion in fiscal support, where if you look at just the US alone, we're talking about $4 to $5 trillion in fiscal support, and across the European Union, just under $3.9 trillion in fiscal support. So obviously, whatever resources are going into Africa to make up for the lost 5 years of growth induced by COVID-19 has been a very, very small fraction of what other countries, what other continents have benefited from. So while fiscal support for economic recovery is needed to build back better, to deal with the debt challenges that have come to be as a result of COVID-19 and the lack of foreign exchange revenue coming in to the African continent, the declines on things like foreign direct investment that have been severe. The question is, how can countries build back better? How can they even afford to buy the vaccines, procure vaccines, so they can also open up their economies? How do countries that had very serious issues of fragility to begin with find a way of getting their economies back on track, the private sector back on track, getting FDI back on track, and more importantly, what are the lessons learned? So obviously, strategic investments in industries like pharmaceuticals, where the continent won't be dependent on receiving vaccines from countries across the world, is definitely going to be something that we absolutely need to learn from. And this is the context in which we are having our discussion today. And let me begin by opening the discussion with His Excellency Mahmoud Mohyeddin. And he will open us up with a very important presentation. And Your Excellency, the COVID-19 pandemic threatens to reverse the progress realized so far in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Governments are redirecting attention and resources to pandemic response, and this is having serious adverse effects, and dealing with compounded shocks and sharp contractions in their economies. As such, many African governments face now a very high debt burden that was unexpected. They are now facing very serious fiscal deficits, and they're struggling to build back their economies to recover and build back better. So how can we ensure that international development financing does not only address systemic risks that undermine progress towards the achievement of the SDGs, but also strengthen the foundations for sustainable recovery and the development of the countries hit hardest by COVID-19 and the COVID-19 crisis? Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khaled, for this introduction, and I have all the honor and pleasure to join this panel of experts and leaders. It's a good opportunity as well to commend the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Egypt for the excellent work and the leadership in organizing this forum very successfully for the second time. I observed the inauguration of this important event from the very beginning, and how the links between economic reforms, political stability, and peace are being integrated in this rich program. I followed as well the sessions yesterday, and I was really impressed with many of the good interventions with very specific suggestions and measures of action to be taken. And I'm very pleased as well, in addition to all of you in the panel, to have Dr. Amani Abu Zaid with us to congratulate her for the continued trust in her skills, talents, and leadership in one of the most important and fundamental areas of work for our continent. You mentioned, Dr. Khalid, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the recent reports by the UN. They would say adequately that 90% of our success in achieving the SDGs, and God forbid our failure as well, is very much pegged on infrastructure. But we take infrastructure from the broader perspective that includes today digital transformation. With your introduction, Dr. Khalid, I have a very brief presentation that should be now more concise. Let me see if the miracles of technology could help me in that. Yes. So, can you see the screen now?
Oh, we can, Your Excellency. Please proceed.
All right, thank you so much. So, yeah, this very busy slide is meant to be that way. It's not really to test your eyes and your visuals, but basically to tell you that it is wrong just to focus on one or two indicators. It's basically better to have a kind of a dashboard approach to assess the performance of economies and societies at large, especially when we are facing these compounded crises in the form of the pandemic and recession. And indeed, there is some serious threat on the debt side. And my intervention today is going to be very much focusing on these three areas: pandemic, fighting recession, and how to deal with debt, and what could be the role of infrastructure development on that. And just given your introduction, Dr. Khalid, I'll be very brief, because we shouldn't really be forgetting at all that we are very much still in the middle of the health crisis. Yes, Africa has done better than others, but Africa definitely has major challenges, especially with the recent figures of the fatality rate to be around 2.5%, higher than the worldwide level of 2.2%, with 3.9 million confirmed cases in Africa, and unfortunately growing in many countries. So that should really be the top priority for actions. And here, yes, Africa has done better than other regions, and it could be the explanation of good policies, good demographics, and indeed good luck, as being mentioned in one of the FT Financial Times editorials. But we shouldn't really be taking that for granted. We need really to do what we should be doing, and making the vaccine available is a necessity. And there is a very big challenge in this area. And I will tell you that the challenges in Africa is not stopping and getting adequate access to the vaccine, but going beyond that. And there are some infrastructure, logistical challenges facing us on this. On the growth front, for the first time in 30 years, in Africa, economic growth turned negative. The UN Economic Commission of Africa reported that output is estimated to have contracted by something like 3.4% last year. We hope for a recovery this year, like in the rest of the world, but it's all dependent on our work on the health front. Unfortunately, and as you can see in the figures down there on those who lost their jobs, we have the ILO estimates of around 29 million people lost their jobs in Africa in 2020, and up to 16 million jobs will be lost in 2021. And this is not taking into consideration the informal sector, which is responsible for employing a majority of workforces in some of the African countries, if you include the agriculture sector activities into it. Then, and again, for the first time in many years, actually since 1998, we see the bad performance in poverty eradication, with 50 to 60 million Africans expected to be pushed into extreme poverty. Add to that learning poverty, with 110 million African children and youth are out of school. They don't have actually the kind of access and the alternatives through virtual means to get access to education. So there's a very big challenge on that. You mentioned FDI prospects, again, in the decline by around 20% for the whole African continent, but you can see the differences or discrepancies between the North and the Sub-Saharan African countries. But overall, there is a major decline in FDI, and there had been a decline as well in trade, though that a recovery is expected, but with a trade gap. In addition to that all, you have the fourth wave of global debt challenges, with more than a fair share of African countries, especially the low-income countries, exposure and vulnerability to debt. We have seen before that waves of debt normally ended in crises. We have seen that in the emerging markets crisis in Asia, before that in Latin America, and of course the global financial crisis. This one, we hope it should be different if we have adequate international cooperation to prevent a debt crisis from happening. So related to that, you mentioned my affiliation with the IMF. There was some good support of the IMF, total crisis support of around 105 billion. Of that, 25 billion were directed to Africa. Low income and middle income countries had some support through a variety of programs, some of them through the rapid finance instruments, some through the augmented existing arrangement, some of that through the rapid credit facility. But at the end, African countries, especially the ones benefiting from the initiative on the debt suspension of services, debt service suspension initiative, had got some support. Now you have seen the announcement of the G20 with the allocation of the new SDR allocation being more likely now, of around 500 billion worth of SDRs. What we need basically is to have better access to such injection of liquidity, because if it is left alone to the allocation per quota, many of the low income and the middle income countries will not really have adequate access to the SDRs. But I'm happy to answer questions about that, how to do it in a more collaborative way to benefit from the new issuance of SDRs. So what should be the way forward then? There is a challenge in the health front. There is an issue of recession upon us, with a huge impact on employment, poverty, and the socioeconomic performance of different countries. And we have the challenges facing us in the finance front. The first one, and we shouldn't be confusing the policymakers when it comes to priorities, the first one without any rival is putting the pandemic under control. Equal access to the vaccine, supporting the COVAX initiative. So far, we still have serious gaps in funding, and investment in delivery of infrastructure and logistics. There is a very interesting piece that I came across by Professor Ensofer, and he was talking mainly about the Ebola vaccination. That was a piece that he published back in January 2020, but he was focusing on issues related to vaccination at large, and it is beyond having the vaccine. In that case of Ebola, it was Ervebo. And then he said, well, even if you have the vaccine, you still face, especially in fragile and conflict-affected countries, you have a security concern. Safety of the health workers need to be guaranteed and secured. Second, governments must invest in detecting, preventing, and responding to infectious diseases. And here, this reminds us with the very strong call by developing economies and emerging markets economies on the WTO back in October to relax the constraints on the trade-related aspects of property rights, That was a submission by South Africa and India that unfortunately was rejected in October when the developing economies asked for a major revision of the TRIPS in order to allow the production of the vaccine and the necessary medicine and the other medicines required to support the dealing with the health crisis with COVID-19. There are also issues related to infrastructure when we know that 38% of healthcare facilities in low and middle income countries lack access to an improved drinking water. And there are major issues related to lack of water or soap in health facilities amounting to 45%. So yes, we need the vaccine, we need to have the access. We encourage countries to invest in the COVAX and support it. And it's a shame to have this still a gap of funding while we lose on daily basis much more than what is required for the COVAX facility to be effectively functioning to avail the vaccine for low-income countries and middle-income countries. But again, beyond that, we need to deal with the challenges in that front related to logistics, infrastructure, safety, and perhaps digital solutions can really be working nicely well in better targeting and better delivery and better monitoring of the activities. You mentioned on the way forward, Dr. Khaled, about the building back better and sustainability and all of that. This is the biggest opportunity for investment in infrastructure. Investment in infrastructure, as we say, it's not just roads, bridges, airports, and essential utilities, but now we include digital networks, what's called the DNA, the data systems, the networks, and artificial intelligence. And it's good that we have Emmanuel with us. Is basically about the whole thing about what we should be doing more in the investment in that front. And of course, Dr. Amani, with many programs, strategies that she's overseeing, will learn from her what could be really transformational and taking the scale of infrastructure required. Good news coming from the IMF side that has been traditionally against more public investment. They came across very good evidence about adequate investments, as little as 1% increase of public investment in ways to crowd in the private sector investment can increase private sector investment by 10%. But not in crowding out, but crowding in the private sector. And the best way to do it is in the investment in infrastructure and digital transformation. That needs to be on a green way and a smart way. And we have many great examples from Korea, from Japan, from China, and from Europe. The whole recovery plan of Europe is basically about building smarter and greener. And it's doable. Quoting from different experts in this area, including Special Envoy Mark Carney, if you are serious about sustainable investments, it's all about restructuring. So this is the biggest restructuring game for Africa. But we need to invest in the human capital, invest in resilience, and invest in infrastructure. Before I leave this, I think I have another slide, and I'll stop. When everybody's optimistic today, with the US returning to the Paris Agreement, with Europe emphasizing sustainability, great news. But for developing economies like Africa, we need to emphasize that such investment in climate change and adaptation and mitigation should be done within these sustainable development goals. At the end of the day, climate change is SDG 13. I cannot do just climate change and the rest of the environmental issues and ignoring essential infrastructure, building cities, having adequate education, investment in health. If we are in the position of Nordic countries, for instance, with their high per capita income, that they manage to achieve what they like in gender and human capital, I would really be focusing only on the sustainability. But in the case of Africa and developing economies, that should be done within the overall framework, which is the 2030 agenda and the 2063 agenda of Africa. The final point. We cannot do all of that without adequate finance. And I know the leadership role that the African Development Bank is doing in Africa. So I don't need to spend more time than what you mentioned there, Dr. Khaled. But basically, we need to have this kind of big framework on financing for development. We need to mobilize domestic resources. Yes, we have challenges today, but actually more than 50% in some of the countries in terms of tax collections is basically due to inadequate systems. So we don't need really to change tax codes or to increase the tax rates. It's basically about dealing with issues related to collection. And here, good governance and good digital transformation could really help us in this area. Leveraging the private investments is essential, and we see in our area, in particular in infrastructure, this is the biggest successful example of public-private partnership. But we need better systems and better implementation, and we need really to have a good pipeline of investable projects on that. We need to navigate the fourth debt wave, and I hope by the work of the G20, the IFIs, and adequate liquidity support, we can really prevent it. Because if we have a debt crisis, all of what I said at the beginning and now are going to be compromised. You are not going to be able to fight any crisis, and you are going to be seeing more recession than what we're seeing. We need to tackle illicit financial flows. It's a shame in the case of the African continent to see more than $90 billion of our resources are subject to illicit financial flows. This is more than what Africa is getting every year through official development assistance and FDI. This needs to stop. And this needs serious work on tax codes, on matters related to business environment and international cooperation. And for that, we need international partnerships. So very big challenges ahead of us, but definitely there are many good solutions relying on good internal coordination and good partnerships. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for that outstanding intervention. And so we will move next to His Excellency Amr Talat, the Minister for Communications and Information Technology, the government of the Arab Republic of Egypt. And so, Your Excellency, the COVID-19 pandemic is not only an unprecedented health crisis, but it's also a socioeconomic crisis. The pandemic brought to the fore a need to invest and advance sustainable development as a key element of the COVID-19 response plan. In a socially distanced world, information technology and digitalization became drivers to enhance the long-term resilience of institutions, businesses, and societies. So, Your Excellency, the pandemic presents both a challenge and an opportunity. In line with Egypt's Vision 2030 and its digital transformation strategy, how has the government of Egypt responded to the pandemic to unlock its digital transformation potential? And moreover, how has Egypt promoted partnerships on the regional level at such an opportune moment? Excellency, for the video response, or if you are available in person.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to take part in this session of the second edition of the Aswan Forum, with a focus on Africa's path to recovery amid these challenging times the world is witnessing due to COVID-19 pandemic. The OECD Development Center's report, issued in January 2021 on Africa's development dynamics, expects the African continent, which is highly exposed to external shocks, to witness its first recession in 25 years, with a decline in gross domestic product of between 2.1% and 4.9%. It is indeed our responsibility to be candid about the effects of the COVID-19 and assess its impact while relying on evidence-based approach. Interestingly, and despite the adverse implications, the pandemic has also created new opportunities. Therefore, I invite you to reflect on four main elements, which have gained more importance and will certainly impact the post-COVID era in our near future, namely digital inclusiveness, resilience, economic integration, and the protection of privacy. In terms of inclusiveness, It was quite impressive to see not only the growth, but also the flourishment of the ICT sectors in many African countries, touching on the lives of new segments and bringing large masses of the populations to the profound realization that digital transformation is inevitable. With internet access expanding based on the growing prevalence of mobile phones, 72% of us Africans now use mobiles regularly. Consequently, we can see ICT availing national programs to support health, education, supplies, and businesses through unprecedented measures, especially for the most vulnerable, including women and the people with special talents. Having said so, I wish to applaud the work done by the AU Commission for Infrastructure and Energy through the African Digital Transformation Strategy, which envisions an integrated and inclusive digital society and economy in Africa, ensuring continental ownership with Africa as a producer and not only a consumer. This invites us to think about the second element which would enable Africa to rebuild better: resilience. The current crisis has demonstrated more than ever the significant role emerging technologies of the fourth industrial revolution are performing. With this in mind, I would like to underscore how artificial intelligence supported researchers and healthcare professionals in the diagnosis and screening of patients with severe symptoms to decide on the appropriate responses and actions to be taken. I'm proud to note that Egypt was able in 2020 to advance forward 55 places in 1 year on the Government AI Readiness Index. The African AI Working Group, as adopted by African ICT ministers, is the right step ahead. I'm happy to note the ongoing efforts of this group and wish to invite the national AI strategists to actively participate in the African AI initiatives and ensure that their interests are taken into consideration while international agreements and regulations are deployed. In addition, applied research centers throughout Africa will play a major role in addressing the pressing challenges of our continent using emerging technologies. Egypt's Applied Innovation Center, AIC, is a case in point and intends to serve the whole continent through creative partnership models. I invite government leaders to communicate with the Egyptian AIC and explore the possibility of pooling resources and sharing experiences to jointly develop localized pilot solutions that use emerging ICTs in addressing similar national challenges in various domains, such as urban planning, resource optimization, modernization of agriculture, improving the efficacy of education and healthcare platforms, among other significant domains. Undoubtedly, resilience is better secured by investing in our human capabilities and in our infrastructure, both of which are the two arms of our economy. Despite the various hurdles and challenges associated with the pandemic, the quantity and quality of ICT-backed mobile solutions and applications developed by our young African innovators have been impressive. Africa's young and increasingly educated population is the prime asset for accelerating the continent's digital transformation. The number of Africans aged between 15 and 29 with an upper secondary or tertiary education has risen from 47 million in 2010 to 77 million in 2020. A comprehensive hierarchical training program is essential to build on our African human wealth. This is the best harvest we could aspire for, a harvest of talents and competitive qualified workforce. In this respect, I'm proud to announce that we are opening soon in the new administrative capital of Egypt a non-for-profit ICT specialized university for Africa we all aspire for. Egypt University of Informatics, EUI, offers our region in its entirety a friendly environment and close venue to graduate highly specialized professionals in the fast-changing fields of ICT and other related specializations. This is pursued through technology-oriented, multidisciplinary, and interprofessional programs focusing on emerging technologies by means of dual degree partnerships with top-ranked universities worldwide. This is our most valuable contribution to our region. I invite African students to consider benefiting from the advanced IT-oriented programs that the EUI is offering in conjunction with world-class universities at a fraction of the cost and closer to home. In addition, allow me to underscore the Egyptian Presidential Initiative, African Application Launchpad, that aims to train 10,000 African calibers on gaming technologies and eventually establish 100 African homegrown startups. Ladies and gentlemen, my third element is digital economic integration. It is a great pride to every African to witness the long-awaited activation of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, be spearheaded by the trade liberalization in services, at the top of which comes ICT, as the first phase of its activation expected to be completed in June 2021. In addition, economic integration will certainly be spearheaded by the second arm of resilience, which is infrastructure, building, and digital preparedness. According to the AUI OECD report on Africa's development dynamics, Africa's total inbound international internet bandwidth capacity increased by more than 50 times in just 10 years to reach 15.1 terabytes per second in December 2019, up from only 0.3 terabytes per second in 2009. The operational fiber optic network extended from 278,000 kilometers in 2009 to 1.02 million kilometers in June 2019. Finally, my fourth element is the protection of the African citizens' privacy in the digital age. It is of paramount importance. As we are in the age of data, where data transactions are essential for digital economy, the continent needs to pay a close attention to data protection of its citizens, on the one hand, and consider best ways to exploit the wealth of data generated by our huge geography and population on the other hand. If yesterday the natural resources and oil were the cornerstone of the economy, today data is. I'm happy to share with you that Egypt promulgated in July 2020 its data protection law, DPL, that is in line with the international legislations and the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, that the Egyptian DPL executive regulations will follow in the coming few weeks. We will be looking forward to sharing and learning from our African brothers in this very important subject that should be properly invested, as it has the potential of bolstering huge industries to our citizenry to exploit to their benefits. Ladies and gentlemen, today more than ever, and despite the challenges of the pandemic, Africa remains a promising field for investments to international development partners and the private sector. Therefore, it is a collective opportunity for Africa to recover stronger and rebuild better based on digital inclusiveness, resilience, economic integration, and the protection of privacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and for that very enlightening presentation. So I turn now to Dr. Amani Abu Zaid, who is the Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy at the African Union Commission. So, Your Excellency, Agenda 2063 is set to accelerate Africa's energy and infrastructure transformation. With the COVID-19 pandemic threatening to reverse these gains, I think it is now more important than ever to unleash Africa's full potential. In this regard, the African Union Commission, the AUC, launched the comprehensive Africa Energy Transition Program that aims at ensuring a continental energy system based on renewable energy sources as well as the COVID-19 response and recovery action plan that mitigates the risks presented by the pandemic. So, Your Excellency, how is the African Union enhancing integration infrastructure to support Africa's recovery post-COVID-19? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khaled, and allow me at the outset to congratulate the Arab Republic of Egypt for pioneering the Aswan Forum as a platform for promoting sustainable peace and development, and also to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for organizing the second edition, following the very successful first forum held in December 2019, in which I was also honored to participate. So I'm very happy and honored to join you today. I'm very pleased to know that the forum is responsive to the changing times as reflected in the chosen theme, shaping Africa's new normal, the recovery, the rebuilding. And I've been listening very carefully to your introduction, Dr. Khaled, to the brilliant presentation by Dr. Muhyiddin and also by His Excellency Minister Talat. But allow me maybe to share a different side from the story, because the story as I am seeing it, is a very positive story. I know these are very difficult times. I know these are exceptional times, and I know also, and one is saddened and hurt by the losses in lives and in livelihoods. However, COVID-19 is probably presenting the continent with one of the biggest opportunities to leap forward. And allow me to explain how. This is one. Two, COVID-19, and I know some of you mentioned statistics, all of them are gloomy and also suspecting or the unreliability of some statistics. But again, from my side, or as seen away from the stereotypes in international media, Africa has written or rewritten its history and in its Pan-Africanism. Let us just remember that as soon as it was declared the pandemic, Africa as a continent and as one came together and applied very drastic precautionary measures. This is one. Two, Africa also at the highest level, the level of the heads of states, came together and had kept convening fortnightly, that's every 2 weeks, and advocating in international fora solidarity with the continent, either it's G7 or G20, to drop the debts, to mobilize resources, established a fund for to respond to the pandemic, established under the African Union again the strategy to contain and to recover from the pandemic, shared its resources where others were fighting for medical supplies. African countries have been sharing with their brothers and sisters the PPEs. African airlines, despite the very dire situation where we are and where we were, have been sharing PPEs and medical supplies and medical support to our brothers and sisters across the continent, whether it's Egyptair, Ethiopian Airlines, the Cameroon Royal Air Maroc. And we have been establishing through the African CDC, again, a brilliant organization recognized now worldwide for the heroic role the African CDC has been and is still playing throughout this pandemic. Two very important platforms with the help and support of our African private sector, who freely established a platform to share the PPEs and medical supplies, to establish also a platform for trusted travel to ensure that we can travel across Africa and authenticate the PCRs and others. Established also, and these are all done by Econet in partnership with our CDC, the platform for vaccines, for procurement of vaccines. And through our African CDC, we secured, in addition to COVAX, 670 million vaccines to Africa. by direct negotiation and again the support, the financial support of Afrexim Bank and the Econet. Our CIB, the bank, the private bank in Egypt, I mean, has been also supporting the Africa Response Fund through financial support, in addition, of course, to the work, excellent contribution of the African Development Bank. So this is Africa. This is how I have been seeing, and I'm still seeing the crisis. So allow me to maybe diverge a little bit from the doom and gloom and the negative story of the COVID in Africa to the Africa, the Pan-Africanism, the Africa coming together as one, the Africa that launched despite the very difficult situation that operationalized at the beginning of this year, the African Free Trade Area. So as I'm saying, from my side, it's a different story, and we want to build on that story to really and to make sure that to turn this crisis into an opportunity. And all of you have been mentioning infrastructure and how important they are. Dr. Taralt, I mean, his presentation was, I think, covered many of the things that I wanted to say on digitalization. And by the way, Dr. Mohiuddin, in the African Union, for us, infrastructure includes also digitalization. Digitalization, I think it's now beyond proof. It is the infrastructure of the 21st century. And when we say digitalization, it's the digitalization of all sectors and all aspects of life. Now, we, as you have heard, we have finalized and launched the African digital transformation strategy. Now we are fast tracking things like e-education, e-health, e-government, the data policy for Africa, enhancing our program for cybersecurity across the board, but also and especially for children. Now, knowing that our children are online 24/7, we are fast tracking the digital ID that brings a lot of opportunities for inclusion, also for trading and transactions, for security, for many things. And when I say all these platforms, some of you may think, okay, this country or that country, but from the African Union standpoint, we are looking at a continent-wide approach or interoperability across the continent. So to make sure that all of us are moving in the right direction together. It's true that there is discrepancy maybe or different levels across the continent. Nevertheless, we want all the platforms to be able to talk together, the digital ID, for instance, to be recognized and or readable everywhere, and so on and so forth. On energy, Dr. Khalid, you mentioned energy. Energy is, again, being fast-tracked for several reasons. Not only we have the issue of access on the continent, of course, as you know, I mean, 600 or almost 600 Africans have no access to electricity, and 900 million Africans do not have access to clean cooking, a major problem. And by the way, Africans who die from accidents from the cooking from kerosene or firewood far exceeds the number of deaths from COVID. I mean, we talk to 400,000 people every year, whereas COVID is hardly until now, I mean, 100,000, even though each life counts, but still 4 times more. So it's more, it's also a very pressing and urgent problem. But also we're looking at the issue of the facilities in rural areas and the remote areas. What we found out is that only almost a fourth of the health facilities in Africa have access to reliable sources of energy. That's why we are fast tracking now a program for mini grid off-grid solutions using the Nexus digital energy and including, you know, and revising and promoting the guidelines we have developed for that, for countries also to include the small and medium enterprises to operate in that sector, keen on the production or the access to electricity to these health facilities, but also to the public in general, and also to support digitalization. Remember, digitalization also works on energy. And speaking of energy, we are fast-tracking all the green transition. COVID-19 not only highlighted the importance of electricity, but the importance of the security when it comes to the energy sector. And security means that you don't, given the disruption in the supply chains, we have to rely on Africa, knowing that things may happen and importing fuel is no longer possible, in addition, of course, to the higher objective of, the climate goals. But energy security is important, and the continent is abundant with renewable resources. Hence, the move now is to rethink our supply from energy to make sure that it's greener, smarter. As I said, smart technologies offer a lot, and there's, I'm sure you've all been seeing the surge in renewable energy everywhere, and commitments also to renewable energy. And this is the story that we want happen in Africa. We launched in January, this last summit, also the African single energy market. Again, based on that, we want Africa to trade with Africa when it comes to energy. Energy is abundant, sources of energy are abundant across the continent. We already have policies or developed policies to harmonize many of the aspects for trading energy. We want to operationalize this aspect. So the African single energy market is also a way of Africa to supply itself and continue to supply itself with energy and benefit from the dynamics of that. And remember, energy is at the basis of industrialization, which is needed also for the free trade area. Last but not least, I want to emphasize transport, and especially air transport, because the crisis is still there. However, we must remember what happened in April, as early as April. Africa came together as one continent, and I'm extremely proud, because this is again one of the great stories that I want to document one day, maybe in a book. How Africa came together as one, the whole air civil aviation industry under the African Union, all African stakeholders, AFCAC, our civil aviation agency, our AFRA, our African airline agency, all our RECs, economic under the African Union, and we developed guidelines and ways to restart the air transport together with ICAO and IATA, which and other stakeholders like the World Tourism Organization. So through that, we were able to reopen in July 2020. But the crisis, as I said, is still there. The crisis is still there because we want to restart, or this industry to start in a different way. We want viability of our air companies. We cannot live on subsidies, and many of our airlines are living on subsidies. We are looking into airports and how to ensure that it's the infrastructure in airports makes use of AI and digital solutions for a seamless and safe travel, especially health-wise. We're looking also, when it comes to land transport, into the digital solutions for urban mobility. This is where, the higher density of population and the hazards happen. So again, the guidelines for that, for safe mobility in cities, but also a smart mobility in cities. So we are really across the board fast-tracking our programs, and in whatever we do, we are looking at green, smart, resilient solutions, and ensuring the inclusion of everyone. And I'm sure everyone has heard me say that before. We mobilized also the network that we established 2 years ago, the African Network for Women in infrastructure, because women have been adversely affected disproportionately under COVID-19. We want to make sure that in all the infrastructure solutions that we are fast tracking, women have a fair share of these contracts, not just as beneficiaries, but also as across the value chain, as heads of companies, as heads of large projects, as providers of large services. We want them to benefit from this boom in infrastructure that we are championing across the continent. I will end maybe my intervention by saying, maybe reminding, the saying by Churchill, never let a good crisis go to waste. And that's our intention. We're not going to let this crisis be written in our history as crisis. It's going to be the best opportunity that ever happened to Africa. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. So, Emmanuel, we turn to you now, and you come at this at a very from an interesting perspective as the head of public policy for Sub-Saharan Africa for Twitter. So, COVID-19 underscores the importance of social media platforms and digital transformation as key agents of change. As governments sought to enforce preventive measures and lockdowns, social media platforms became an integral source of information and provided an alternative mode of communication in the absence of face-to-face interactions for about 2.9 billion users. So in this regard, can you please elaborate on key initiatives that Twitter launched as the world grapples with the pandemic to address the concurrent infodemic and ensure access to reliable information? Moreover, as more people resort to social media platforms for information and networking, how does Twitter ensure protecting the public conversation and contain the spread of misleading and high-risk content? And this is what we're seeing on vaccines now. So back to you, Mr. Lobenziyadu.
Thank you very much, Khaled, Dr. Khaled, for this introduction. Also, I would like to extend my thanks to the ASWAN Forum for the invitation as well to include us in this much needed and very important conversation. As it pertains to Twitter's standpoint, the public conversation happening on Twitter has been even critically important during this pandemic more than ever. With a critical mass of expert organizations, official government accounts, and health professionals on Twitter, our goal has been, ever since the pandemic started, really to amplify credible health information to ensure that we are helping people find accurate information when they come to Twitter for it. So really, in addition to ensuring that we are getting that people are getting the right message at the right time from the right source, we've also just enabled really governments and also NGOs to raise relief funds. We've donated advertisement grants to governments and non-government organizations so that they can use the reach that we have with 500 million tweets a day to really share their fair share of credible information, so that really free of charge. But one thing that this pandemic has really shown is that nothing can be done in isolation, but more so in partnership. So accordingly, in over 30 countries, we've launched Twitter events pages that really bring together the latest tweets from a number of governments, media, and civil society sources, really translated in local languages, so that our different Twitter users across the globe can actually take advantage of the language diversity to be exposed to credible information. We've continued to elevate the conversation addressing safety and effectiveness of mask wearing with a series of Twitter moments, marketing campaigns, customized emoji that can be activated with the hashtag wear a mask. This has been translated in over 20 languages. So and even as it pertains to regional and global health organizations, we've facilitated different kind of conversations. We've launched the Know the Facts prompts available in approximately 80 countries. We have hosted Q&As in partnership with the WHO, and even launched different global activation campaigns to really encourage guideline adherence, such as wash your hands, hashtag healthy at home, let's talk campaign. But I think one thing that's worth really pointing out is also the collaboration that we've been having with UNESCO. So since the beginning of the crisis, we've carried out 2 media literacy campaigns in partnership with UNESCO using the hashtag think before sharing. In addition to that, we've actually introduced also a prompt whereby people who retweet an article, they're encouraged to actually read this article first. So, you know, really for us to ensure that people tweet responsibly. But our partnership with UNESCO goes even way back before the COVID pandemic, because misinformation and media literacy, there's an approach that we tackle or seek to tackle through capacity building. As such, we, in 2019, in collaboration with UNESCO, we have launched a Teaching and Learning with Twitter handbook. So the handbook is really geared towards educators who really want to unlock the benefits of Twitter as a learning tool in a classroom, obviously, but also this has been really guided through UNESCO and recommendations. It contains best practices and really shows how Twitter can be used for creative, different media literacy campaigns, and for particularly for children, because knowing that now everything has gone online and children really being taught, homeschooled and taught at home, safety, media literacy is very important. So this is something we've been stressing with this partnership with UNESCO. But coming back to this COVID crisis and the spread of misinformation, Twitter has really just really stayed up to date and committed to really moving forward and updating on a constant basis in partnership with our different regional global partners. So we've broadened our definition of what is considered harm in collaboration and consultation with the WHO, so that we take immediate action by removing denial of global or local health authority recommendations related to COVID. Any description of at least cures that are not approved by the WHO or Africa CDC, it's immediately removed as well. And any propagation of false facts, this is something we take immediate action as well. But as I said earlier, our approach is really geared towards partnerships and capacity building. And since I'm the one leading our public policy engagement in Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, one thing that's been really inspiring in terms of having conversations and learning is an initiative that was actually started by the African Youth Envoy that I think recently left the post. Her term had expired. So it was a platform that was convened by the name of Africa Youth Front on Coronavirus, comprised many young African civil society organizations who have utilized this pandemic not so much as a crutch, but more so as an opportunity to kind of leverage Pan-African collaboration. So we've had different sessions. I had a training to kind of explain how Twitter can be used during this pandemic to kind of amplify credible information. But at the same time, this session has really given me so much to also learning how different young Africans on the ground have been movers and shakers and really during this pandemic to make it happen, to share incredible information. And I then was able just to leverage and show to capacity building how to utilize or leverage our platform. And another collaboration that kind of goes towards the philosophy that I've mentioned based upon partnership and capacity building is a partnership that we started with Amref Health Africa, one of the largest nonprofits focused on healthcare. The partnership really started when we kind of started talking. Amref has been using Twitter to amplify credible information. And obviously us being Twitter wanted to kind of learn more about this. We discussed ways how we can potentially work together to really, during this critical period, to launch this kind of credible information. So we had a webinar hosted, which kind of gathered the private sector, ourselves, but also the Africa CDC director who graced us with his presence at the panel, who then kind of shared the amazing work that Africa CDC has been doing. So this was a great collaboration, but we kind of just wanted to move away from just merely talking, but also identifying ways how we can support. So we've learned that Amref Health has a healthcare journalism course, so we pretty much teach journalists who may not be familiar with the health field to kind of familiarize them with topics related to healthcare. So we found out about this and, you know, reach out to Amref Health, continue this collaboration, do a donation. But even beyond the donation now, the course is offered 3 times a year. So what we will do, Twitter will always host a session during each class offering, hosting a capacity building session to kind of teach journalists how they can leverage our platform, the networks, and how the platform in general can be used. So that really goes back to, again, to the spirit of really partnership, collaboration, and capacity building. And this is something we are actually seeing moving forward. And I think that, as the panel has mentioned earlier, the importance of data. During this pandemic, what we have noticed is, as opposed to Twitter merely taking action and enforcement, why not empowering others to do so, or not really to do so, but more so to collaborate, to expose, because we are geared towards transparency, and we are providing data access to our API endpoint, which was previously merely open to developers. but knowing the role that academia is playing during this pandemic and in amplifying credible information, we've just recently, a couple of weeks ago, just extended this to different academias as well. So there are different conversations happening at this stage and different capacity building trainings that we will be giving, how Twitter can be used for governments, how Twitter can be used as a crisis response to amplify credible information, but also to different folks, to youth organizations, to NGOs in general. So this is a conversation that we keep continuing having. And as we speak, and since Dr. Khaled, you have mentioned the spread of vaccine-related misinformation, we are currently working with a couple of governments on the continent on the development of a misinformation prompt, so that every time a Twitter user globally, but also as pertains to the African continent, types in something related to vaccine, that person will then be directed from Twitter to a ministry-related page, which kind of contains credible information. So this is something we've been really emphasizing, forcing, and working on. So again, built upon partnerships globally, but also on the African continent, capacity building second, and thirdly, really empowering others to really use our platform to the maximum effect to share and amplify credible information.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. So the final question goes to Dr. Helmy, and I, unfortunately, always being the last speaker, we always face the challenge of time. So I think it falls on your shoulders to see how much time you can give us for Q&As. But first, foremost, FG Hermes become a signatory of the nation's principles for responsible investment and has taken the concrete steps towards strengthening their sustainability while ensuring continuous corporate growth. So as such, EFG's projects aim to support men and women as well as institutions to overcome the financial, educational, and health-related challenges facing communities in need. So as head of corporate social responsibility and CEO Dr. Hannah, and in line with EFG's latest projects, how does EFG utilize financial mechanisms, flexible financing, as well as innovative and targeted investments to advance equitable COVID-19 recovery and long-term sustainable development? Over to you, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Khaled. I'll do my best to terminate on time. Excellencies and distinguished panelists, it's an honor to be with you tonight. It is my honor and privilege to participate in this second edition of the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development. I will concentrate my presentation on the activities of the FG Hermes Group with respect to ESG, CSR, financial inclusion, and focus on education. Over its 35 history year, EFG Hermes has transformed itself from a leading Egyptian investment bank to a fully integrated financial services provider. Starting 2011, EFG Hermes took measured and committed steps to integrate environmental, social, and governance (ESG) considerations into all aspects of its operation. Sustainability has now become a cornerstone of our policy. By signing and committing to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment in 2018, we have been taking measured but determined steps to align our business with ESG factors. We have learned that commitment to ESG issues is not a luxury and that the business case for sustainability is increasingly sound. We have also realized that we cannot get away with just paying lip service to ESG considerations and that we must transform our business to meet the challenge. This all prepared us to face crises, including a global pandemic. Previously, governance and environmental issues dominated the global ESG narrative and the global dialogue pre-COVID. This year, the COVID-19 pandemic brought social issues to the forefront, highlighting how most vulnerable and disproportionately affected by global conditions. The COVID-19 pandemic gave rise to a set of completely unforeseen circumstances, creating crises that required immediate attention and the development of solutions that were both creative and compassionate. Our previous skills and commitment to ESG and the SDGs came apparent. As soon as the full impact of the COVID-19 pandemic became apparent, we realized that it would fall upon us to provide support not only to our employees and staff around the world, but also to the community at large through our established CSR networks and the EFG Hermes Foundation. When it comes to our CSR efforts, our journey started in 2014 when we articulated our social purpose and took measured and consistent steps to integrate ESG factor in every aspect of our operation and create an ecosystem that supports the fulfillment of the SDGs. We took a step further in 2020 as we incorporated ESG factors into our business manuals and processes, laying out our responsible investment policy, providing a general ESG framework, and outlining the approach to ESG integration across our major business lines. In addition, EFG Hermes has always prioritized the social aspect, both through its Foundation for Social Development and through various products that promotes financial inclusion and economic well-being. In 2020, it was more vital than ever that EFG Hermes demonstrates solidarity with those most affected by the pandemic and its economic repercussions. Since its establishment in 2006, the EFG Hermes Foundation adopted an integrated, partner-centric approach to sustainable development as the most effective means of maximizing both impact and return on investment of scarce funds and resources. One of our main tenets has been that partnership is the only way to realize sustainable development on a scale that has tangible impact. Over the years, our signature integrated development projects have gained a reputation for effectiveness, galvanizing partners from both the public and private sector and from civil society. Through our work with local communities in Upper Egypt, we laid the groundwork to face crises that may arise even before the pandemic. The Foundation took a holistic approach to social development, human development, and economic empowerment equally. All this prepared us and our beneficiaries to face unprecedented circumstances. We were ideally placed to deploy a series of targeted interventions to help mitigate the pandemic's effects on the most vulnerable members of society and to support our development partners in their efforts. Our most recent intervention in Upper Egypt is the 70 million Egyptian pound Naga El Fawal and El Deir Village Integrated Rural Development Project that takes a holistic approach to the SDGs, tackling almost all the targets applicable to rural environmental simultaneously. Benefiting over 75,000 inhabitants, the project involves the rehabilitation of an entire community, starting with infrastructural development and encompassing economic and human development initiatives and access to services. In a community that suffers from disadvantaged living conditions, extreme poverty levels, and minimum services, we were able to work together with the local communities, the local government, and the private sector to provide decent houses to the families at Naga El Fawal, a decent health unit with up-to-date medical equipment and income generating opportunities for most of the community. We also had the interest of future generations at the center of our project. That is why we established a Montessori preschool that provides quality education and social skills unavailable anywhere in the vicinity. The preschool provides 150 children with a solid base that will allow them to thrive as they follow their education path. Teachers at the Young Scholars Academy have been receiving training on the Montessori philosophy in early education since August of 2017. The preschool also offers a special program catering to 50 children with special needs. The preschool has successfully created 50 sustainable jobs. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, small businesses were extremely affected, with many finding it difficult to repay loans or maintain lines of communication with their customers. Inspired by the Central Bank of Egypt's decision to postpone payment of loan installments, two of EFG Hermes subsidiaries, Tanmea Microenterprise Services and PayTabs Egypt, innovative digital payment solutions, immediately introduced offers to their clients to ease financial strains of the pandemic. Over 85,000 clients benefited from the offers. The last year taught us a key lesson, which is that partnership is vital in order to localize and implement the SDGs. The problems that face us today are multifaceted, and sustainability hinges on buy-in from all stakeholders. The SDGs provide a common language and a unified sense of purpose across all dimensions of sustainable development, whether at the level of government, civil society, or business. The global pandemic was unpredictable. However, as leader in the financial sector, we were constantly advocating for a responsible business conduct internally and externally to ensure a sustainable business model and set leading example for others. And when COVID hit, we were prepared. Our commitment to ESG practices, PRI, and SDGs allowed us to withstand the early effects of the pandemic and move forward. When it comes to education, the COVID-19 pandemic has had devastating effect. To compound the problem, aid to education is declining by 12% as a result of the pandemic, and even before COVID, there was a gap in funding. Based on what we learned from the Ebola epidemic, it is estimated that around 24 million children might not make it back to school. This would be a major setback. Children need a safe space and a connection. EFG Hermes has always placed a great value on education. In 2018, EFG Hermes Private Equity entered into an exclusive partnership with Global Education Management Systems, GEMS, one of the world's leading providers of private English language education for students from K-12, to jointly establish a $200 million USD platform focused on Egypt's underserved K-12 education sector. In addition to the above, the group has produced a series of financial literacy videos, sponsored the Model Egyptian Stock Exchange, and conducted orientation and mentorship sessions to students at several Egyptian universities. And finally, in 2020, EFG Hermes partnered with GEMS Egypt for education services to provide a series of learning opportunities for senior students, exposing them to the professional world and enabling them to learn by doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hanat. So unfortunately, we are roughly about 5 minutes over time. So I will have to take the executive position of leaving our question and answers to be submitted through a different platform. And I think it would be just important to put in some closing remarks as we conclude. So as we heard from all of our distinguished speakers, that Africa does have to take steps at the regional and national levels to build back better, to build back stronger post-COVID-19. Every economic environment is different, every country is different, but clearly there are common threads that we will have to build back better to develop sustainable energy solutions, to build back better, as Dr. Mani Abu Zaid said, for developing key infrastructure capacity for the continent, to build back better in terms of digitalization, a point made by both His Excellency Mahmoud Mohyeddin and His Excellency Ahmed Talat. And of course, as we heard from the very important points made also on the importance of making sure that we can recover in a stronger way and also roll out vaccines effectively and responsibly, as Emmanuel and Dr. Hanat both indicated. So with that, given that we are 5 minutes over time, I would like to thank everyone who joined us today, all of our distinguished speakers for their participation. As we have run out of time, I felt very honored and privileged to have basically chaired this very important discussion. And signing off, Khaled Sharif, the Vice President for Regional Development Integration and Business Delivery. And we wish everyone a very good evening or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Our thanks, of course, to the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, the Egyptian Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and the Aswan Forum for making this all possible. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, participants. Have all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.